Hi everyone, my name is Bree if you don't know me already. I'm a Certified Death and Spiritual Doula. And today I really want to explore a sensitive but extremely important topic in way more detail. And it came from my short series, Things People Have Asked Me as a Death Doula. Today I am going to be discussing in depth about MAID. It's also known as medical aid in dying. Why? Well, this choice is now legal in 10 US states and several other countries around the world, such as Canada, Switzerland, Spain, UK, and even more. And I want to get on here and share some facts about the laws, the requirements, some moral and ethical religious implications, and of course, some personal stories that I've encountered, both positive and negative. So let's start with a quick overview of what MAID is. MAID involves a physician providing a prescription that a terminally ill, mentally competent patient can take themselves to end their life peacefully. In the US, MAID is available in California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maine, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, and Vermont as of today, which is November 11th, 2024. The decision requires multiple medical confirmations and a waiting period to ensure that this is a well-considered and a voluntary choice. These are very important because the person needs to be competent at the time of making these decisions, as well as competent when performing, if it goes through and the physician approves and the whole process gets approved. So let's start with the legal landscape. Each jurisdiction has its own legal nuances, but overall, these laws, MAID laws, death and dying, end of life options. I mean, they've got names upon names upon names, as laws do, but they aim to protect both patients and healthcare providers. In the US, the law shields providers from prosecution when they follow these strict guidelines, and in countries where MAID is allowed, very similar legal frameworks are also in place. And it's designed to ensure the process is voluntary and respectful. It also provides protection for those committing or using MAID for their own end-of-life option. It rules out suicide if done properly, which also has ramifications legally and also insurance-wise, at least in the US. What are some moral and ethical perspectives? Let's consider some proponents. Some argue that MAID is about dignity and personal choice. They believe that facing inevitable, unbearable suffering, that MAID offers a compassionate way to pass peacefully without prolonged pain. We do this for our animals usually, and some people say that we are much more compassionate towards animals than we are to other people. However, there are opponents who express concern over this slippery slope, where this could potentially devalue life, fearing pressure on vulnerable individuals who choose death over life, especially if they feel they are a burden on family members. Another moral implication of this is, where do we cross the line? In some countries, it is legal to use this option for possible things that will have a cure, that can be cured. There are other options for like depression. I know some countries allow this in cases of depression, where other people are like, well, it should actually be a fatal, life-limiting illness to less than 6 months of life left, or something about that. Some more is definitely some autonomy and personal choices. Supporters emphasize that the importance of autonomy and the right to decide is the course of one's own life and death. For those facing the terminal illness, they argue is a compassionate option that grants individuals control over they experience their final chapter of life, which is a complete autonomy, which is what I really strive for as a death doula. However, there are critics that question whether autonomy can truly be exercised freely in a situation where illness may bring physical, emotional, and financial burdens. There's concern that someone might feel pressured, subtly or overtly, to consider MAID if they feel they are a burden on loved ones or society. There's also the issue of the value of life. On the pro side, advocates argue that the quality of life is a significant factor in life dominated by suffering may diminish one's dignity and sense in self. With this view, choosing MAID does not devalue life, but instead respects individuals' judgment about what makes life worth living. On the other end, opponents believe that intentionally ending a life undermines society's commitment to valuing and preserving life, especially for vulnerable groups. The fear that normalizing this option may shift cultural attitudes towards less respect for the elderly, disabled, terminally ill, chronically ill, and this could lead to subtle societal pressures on these populations. So, what is the role in the medical profession? People for MAID see it as a compassionate extension of palliative care, a way for doctors to respect patients' wishes and help ease the inevitable suffering that medicine cannot always resolve. Opponents, however, argue that providing the means for death completely contradicts the medical profession's oath to do no harm. They worry that physicians' end-of-life choices about MAID could definitely create conflicts of interest and blur these lines between healing and causing death. So, what are some safeguards against coercion? Ethical guidelines surrounding MAID emphasize strict criteria and rigorous assessment to ensure the patient's choices is completely voluntary and made out of complete sound of mind. For MAID to work as intended, robust safeguards need to be in place, and these include thorough counseling and second opinions from healthcare providers. So it's not just somebody going to a medical professional saying, do you think I'm dying? Can I have this option? There are many, many appointments, many follow-ups, many counseling sessions, many, many safeguards. However, it's still a concern among critics about the possibility of subtle coercion or pressure, especially with individuals without a strong support network or with limited access to palliative care. Advocates stress that MAID should be a choice and not a solution to issues like lack of access to good care, and any decision must be made absolutely free from financial, familial, or societal pressures. And yet, in all our decisions, aren't those always a factor? So what do religious and cultural beliefs on life and death, how do they come into play? There are some religious perspectives that view life as a sacred source, said that a little weird, and believe that only a higher power should determine its end. These beliefs, choosing the end prematurely is seen as morally wrong and spiritually harmful, not only to the individual, but potentially to those involved. And these are going to definitely fall heavily within the Christian, Jewish, and I believe Muslim faiths. There are others, I'm sure. I just don't know too much beyond that on this situation. Whereas others argue that spirituality and compassion might support MAID when it reduces suffering, aligns with more personal interpretation of faith, and this ethical dimension is highly personal and it varies wildly across everybody, all cultures and religions. which should be respected and considered. Overall, the ethical and moral considerations surrounding MAID reveal deep questions about the meaning of dignity, autonomy, compassion, all in the face of death. By examining these viewpoints, we can gather a fuller understanding of why this choice resonates so differently across individuals and communities. But now I would really like to share some personal stories of what has gone on, what I've heard, what I've experienced as a death doula, death and spiritual doula. The first one, my first encounter where I started diving into the pros and cons, is when I met a retired hospice nurse who had a brain tumor that was operated on once. It came back and it was inoperable, and her quality of life would continue to diminish, and it was considered terminal. She did find a doctor and a whole team that allowed her to use the Colorado end of life option. She was so grateful that she had that option. She and her physician designed her perfect way out, and she was very excited and grateful that she would not have to endure the long, intense suffering that she knew was going to come. And it was really exciting to know that she had that option, and she was so excited about it. The second case I heard was a group of friends and family members that did a living funeral for somebody who also had this option of MAID in Canada. Some of his friends traveled from around the world to come visit him a week before he was deciding to end his life with physician assistance. And everyone expressed their gratitude to be able to see him in a more healthy, happy, joyful, living funeral situation than to watch their friend and family member suffer and deteriorate in the way they knew he would. So everyone was very grateful that they got to anticipate, plan, spend that time, do this living funeral before he ended his life through MAID. And it was another really grateful, positive experience. The third story I've heard personally, a gentleman shared how a family member also chose the end of life option, and the whole family gathered while she was in the process. She had 2 minutes to drink the cocktail that was designed by her physician. The whole family was there, and I believe that everything went peacefully and beautifully and gratefully. However, I've also heard the negative implications from our local coroner. I sat down and he shared his fears and worries about this option. While there are many safeguards in place, there is still quite a lot of ambiguity around the laws that were written. So some fears he expressed was if a person had this medication, let's say it was in a pill form, but they either passed away before they were able to take it, or kids broke into their house either before or after and raided their medicine cabinets. Teenagers and young adults have things called pill parties where they just throw a bunch of pills into a bowl and just take a handful and go crazy. I didn't know about that until the coroner told me, but he said, what if that was in the pill and then somebody died from that? There are some other also situations he's been involved in where the patient did not tell their provider that they were doing it. And so what happens when a person tells their provider, the doctor can send over a nurse to check for end-of-life signs. Knowing that they did the end-of-life option, the nurse can say there's no signs of life and they rule it a natural death. If the person negates to tell their physician and that process isn't followed, then the coroner, the cops, the EMTs, everyone gets called out, and it unfortunately has to be ruled a suicide. And then you have life insurance implications, legality complications. You have kind of a waste of resources. You know, the cops, the paramedics, the firefighters, the coroner, everyone that's doing all of this stuff could have easily been prevented. So it is a waste of resources. So from what I gleaned from that is, if this is an option for you, please tell your provider when you plan on taking it, minimally. If you don't want to share with other people, if you don't want to have a living funeral beforehand, if you don't want to have a gathering, at least tell your physician. They're not going to say, no, don't do it. They wouldn't have prescribed it if that was the case. Please just tell them so that they can send over a check for signs of life, and it can be ruled a appropriate end of life option and natural death. Those are my stories, and I'm sure there will be more, as this is a relatively new concept, and not concept necessarily, but a legal option in the US. So as things become more well known, I would absolutely love to get on and share again more about what I've learned. And my choice, as a death doula, is I want everybody to have the most autonomy possible. And, I'm a very spiritual person and believe that it is between you, your higher self, and your creator, our creator. I have no right to judge, and I just really want to support you however I can. So it is a deeply personal decision. It definitely is very complex. And whether someone finds this option comforting or controversial, understanding facts and respecting personal choice is really essential. And my goal in sharing this is to provide, as much as I can, a balanced perspective on what MAID involves, some of the impacts, and the choices it allows. If you have any questions or you wish to share your thoughts on this topic, please feel free to reach out. Thanks for watching, and remember, each perspective on this topic is valid, just as each individual's journey through end-of-life decisions is uniquely their own. And if you want to get up in arms about it, please don't do it here. Please go to your legislation and, throw your opinions and, your facts and your resources at them. I'm just trying to deliver pros and cons from many different views. It's so that we all try to get a better understanding of all the implications and the options that exist in our ever-ending quest for end-of-life options, conversations, questions, and of course, things people ask me as a death doula.